Hey, what's up guys? This is Oakley and I have some tantalizing news that was just tweeted out, and actually I went and checked something called the EGX London event. So this is an event that was previously known as the Eurogamer Expo. So this is something in the past that the Total War and Creative Assembly has shown up to, just to give us a little bit of hint of stuff in the future. Anyways, if you go ahead and check out the link below, and I'll show you the image of what I'm looking at right here. This is their official site with the countdown. You know, from now it's about 2 weeks from now. And if you look at the Thursday, the 25th of September, scroll down to about 1600 o'clock. It's slated in, guys, this is pretty exciting, the next Total War. Under this it says Creative Assembly reveals the next title in the award-winning Total War strategy series. Don't miss this. So that is huge, that's awesome. So now a lot of speculation obviously is going to run rampant. Spoilers on any of this, or at least let's put some sort of notice that I'm just going to speculate. There is obviously no news here besides the announcement that there's going to be an announcement. Anyways, so take everything I said with a grain of salt. Anyways, let's run down a bit of the speculation. So a couple things that we know thus far. So one is going to be that in the not too distant past, CA said that they wouldn't be doing a third in a series and really revisiting too much of the same stuff they'd done in the past. So they said, you know, we're not going to do Medieval Total War 3 or Shogun Total War 3. They didn't want to do like a third iteration of something, at least in the near future. They didn't rule it out, but it's probably not going to be the next iteration. Now that doesn't mean they can't do an in-between period, you know, maybe High Medieval Ages or Early Medieval Ages, the fall of the Roman Empire, between that and the medieval times, or they could go maybe revisit Empire 2. Also, a lot of people are speculating that they might be doing something like warring China. So for those of us in the West, our history classes and a lot of the stuff we've learned is very, very quiet about China. You almost hear nothing about China. Which is amazing, because for a long time China was actually much more technologically, militarily, economically superior to Europe, and it was only later on in time with the Industrial Revolution and some decline in what was going on in China that you start to see the paths cross. But for a long time China was this budding empire, super strong, and a lot of internal strife, invasions here and there, so a lot of material for Total War could be in that period, and it'd be a great time period to go and explore a lot of cool stuff to look into. So I'm hoping that's something that we might touch on. Again, it might be something that fits in between Medieval 2 and Rome 2 and blah blah blah, something like that. So that's sort of one tangent and direction we could go into. Now perhaps the slightly more interesting one, well actually there's an in-between one. Another thing that it could be is Total War Arena, which is something that obviously that was announced in the past, where that's supposed to be I believe it's free-to-play thing online, where you sort of have different armies from different time periods, small units, and you fight online and you customize them and all that stuff. So that's maybe what they're announcing, but that's not so much what I see it as, because they're announcing it as, you know, a new title, whereas Total War Arena is something they sort of announced in the past. So I'm sort of ruling that out for now. The potential for China one I think is relatively high, although maybe it's another period of history in another area of the world. And then the third, sort of more tantalizing thing that I'm going to sort of speculate on, and you can hear excuse me, sort of the excitement in my voice, is going to be the possibility of Total War and something that maybe you guys know, maybe you don't, is Warhammer. So Warhammer, made by Games Workshop, is something in the past I loved. I used to paint all the minifigurines. So it's a tabletop game that has all sorts of different sort of genres to it. So it has, you know, Warhammer Fantasy, 40k, all sorts of other stuff that you can play. What will most likely fit with this Total War is going to be fantasy. And so the details behind this is, well, in late, I think 2012 it was, I think in December, the Creative Assembly actually was able to purchase and enter into a title licensing deal with Games Workshop to create video games based off Warhammer. And so that sort of indicates that they're, you know, probing into that, and that they have an interest in that sort of thing. So in the background here I'll probably be playing some sort of videos of previous Games Workshop Warhammer whatever stuff that people have put together trailers for, because there have been previous games released for Warhammer, but none of them under Total War. So anyways, some of those games that I'm talking about and I'm showing videos of in the background were slated for release, but were later didn't come out and stuff like that. Some of them did, so it's kind of a mixed feeling about that. Mostly you've seen the Warhammer franchise be focused on 40k, which is the future. We have all sorts of, you know, interstellar warfare, all kinds of factions dueling it out, and that's something that has been more prominent in video games. the fantasy aspect hasn't been made too much in the video game sense. So it's cool that there's a potential for Total War to partner and do something with that. For those of you who are unfamiliar what Warhammer Fantasy is, it's something that takes place in a fantasy land that is, oh, how do you put this, maybe high medieval periods, and you have a ton of factions. So for instance, I hope to share with you guys some stuff. I got a bunch of tabs open on the internet here just to refresh me on the different things going on. Anyways, this is a map I found of the Warhammer Old World. There's all sorts of different books and huge in-depth lore on the Warhammer world, so they can do a lot about this stuff, but the world itself is sort of kind of supposed to be like a medieval Europe, but obviously with a hint of fantasy, and you have tons of factions vying it out. So the first and foremost, the most vanilla one is going to be Empire. These guys are like high medieval guys, knights in armor, peasants with pikes, and all sorts of stuff that you might see in a medieval Total War game, but they have, they're in this world where they're fighting against all sorts of different enemies. So you have Empire. Then you have the other high fantasy stuff. So you have the orcs and goblins. So these are, beefy guys, warlike, just sort of almost barbarians, but with fantasy. And they have access to stuff like, trolls and whatnot, and really cool units. Then you have the elves, so high elves, dark elves. I think you have forest elves. I'm sort of rusty on this. So obviously, everything that entails elves, archery, high quality troops. And then you have, you start to get into this groups like Chaos, which are very, how do you put this? They sort of look like Teutonic Knights. They're evil, like very devilish looking guys with huge armored troops. They have access to something like dragons and all sorts of crazy stuff. Then you have some odd like factions built in there. So you have, I'll go ahead and mention the dwarves who are in there too. They take on a different sort of aspect, which is pretty cool about the dwarves, where of course they're close quarter axe guys and stuff, but they're actually kind of high technology. So you'll see them running around with some guns. They have mortars in some cases. They have something I think that was called the gyrocopter. So they have like early helicopters and stuff. They have zeppelins and whatnot. So the Total War tabletop games has been long enough long enough to develop all sorts of unique units. So if Total War were to go after this, they have all sorts of stuff to implement. They can really make these factions stand out. I don't know to what extent they'll bring in the different factions, because you have stuff like, for instance, Skaven, which is all about this plague-like rat faction, which would be super interesting to have in the game. I mean, that's ridiculous. The most ridiculous, and the one I would be most excited to see, is something that's called, let me flip through the tabs here, the Lizard Men. So these guys are fucking, excuse me my cursing, they're badass. These guys are awesome. So imagine like the Aztec guys, and then imagine dinosaurs, and put them together, and that's what these guys are. They're so cool. So they're dinosaurs, and they ride other dinosaurs. So imagine like an Aztec warrior who's himself like a raptor dinosaur thing, who's riding a T-Rex. That's the kind of stuff you can see. They have like all sorts of access to dinosaurs and different things. It's super cool what you start getting into this. But the more you go into this, the more like high fantasy obviously it is. You also have stuff that you can do like the living dead. So you have people who kind of look like Egyptian reincarnated mummies, and you have all sorts of stuff that can really play into, if you're going to do a map of this place, if you go to the sandy region, you're going to run into these like Egyptian factions, and if you go into the north, you're going to run into more of the dwarves, and if you go into the rainforest, you'll run into the Aztec lizard men. There's really opportunity for how do you put that? I don't know. Like, it's just super cool stuff, like in every aspect. Now, on top of the these different factions, there's also different aspects to the game. So there's a high importance on obviously specializations for each group. Each group also has these specialized guys. So it's because it's the tabletop game where you buy certain pieces and you fight them. There's sort of an emphasis on having high quality guys. So specifically you have your army, and then you might have your general, but each general will be like an individual guy, sort of like heroes like you had in Shogun 2. So that's something you would see with each faction. There's an associated hero who has powers, abilities, all sorts of stuff. So for like the lizardman guy, it might be a really big buff lizard guy riding a T-Rex, or if you go to the dwarves, it might be a really badass dwarf guy outfitted with all sorts of high-tech equipment, or if you go to Mark of Chaos guys, like dual-wielding flaming axes, all sorts of skulls on him. So there's a lot of potential for that kind of stuff. On top of this, you put all the fantasy stuff, so you have access to magic and whatnot. So it starts to be really a very interesting mechanic that is going to be interesting to see. Again, this is speculation, to see how it melds with Total War, because obviously Total War has been very historical in the past, But then you start getting into Rome too, where they implement what something people have said is, these magic buttons, which is something that would make absolute sense when you go into the fantasy world of Warhammer, where all these units do have special abilities. So that's where I see them making the connection. And then also, you take maybe the heroes from Shogun 2, give them some skins and abilities, and then you have that, in this mix where you have these different factions with special heroes from, function kind of like Shogun 2, and you get this really interesting, deep, rich world, but I have no idea how they're going to balance this, so I don't want to speculate too much. I think it'd be a handful to try and implement this. I mean, how do you even motion capture this stuff? Like, you have, Skaven, these rat people? How do you motion capture, I can imagine the people at Creative Assembly, in rat costumes with, blue suits with dots on them, trying to reenact what does a rat look like when it's attacking a dwarf, or what does a rat look like when it's attacking a lizard Aztec guy. It starts to be a handful, so we'll have to see what comes out of this, but just, the amount of depth and how much CA has to choose from each of these factions, I think they could make it work. They're obviously going to have to tone it down a bit and select just certain factions, flesh those guys out, make it balanced, make them intricate and detailed, and have their own specialties, but still keep it, tame, because this is a huge leap from the traditional historical stuff. Anyways, this is again just me kind of nerding out about some of this stuff that is unconfirmed, so that's just, me introducing you to Warhammer, giving you a bit of a tease of what could be. Anyways, we'll have to stay tuned for more news with that regard. So again, as I said, it could just be Total War Arena, or it could be another, historical Total Wars thing. Maybe Warring China would be cool. But anyways, that's going to be enough of speculation for this point in time. Go ahead and check the links below, or do your own research on Warhammer Fantasy. It's super cool stuff. So anyways, hope I didn't tease you guys too much. Again, disclaimers, none of this has been confirmed. The only thing that's confirmed is the announcement of the announcement for the game. So take all of this with a grain of salt. Anyways, I will see you guys next time. Thanks so much.